On the night of November 28, 1960, in the small town of Toribert, near Turin in northern Italy, two brothers ran into their basement listening post and switched on their tape recorders. They were Achille and Giovanni Giudicacordiglia, 24 and 20 respectively, amateur radio enthusiasts and space program followers who had built one of the most sophisticated private listening posts in Europe. They had built their own dish antenna from a shipping container. They had assembled professional-grade receivers from war surplus equipment. They had taught themselves Russian. They specifically watched for Soviet space program radio communications. On that November night, they recorded what they would later describe as the sound of a male astronaut, in distress, trying desperately to communicate with mission control before his transmission cut off. He spoke Russian, complaining about temperature and breathing problems. The Italian brothers preserved the tape. They went on to record other strange transmissions from Soviet spacecraft over the next 2 years. In May 1961, 3 weeks after Yuri Gagarin's official first manned spaceflight, they recorded what they identified as a male voice in extreme distress. In November 1963, they recorded a female voice, in Russian, with rising panic, calling out before falling silent. The voices belonged to people the Soviet Union officially denied existed. The conspiracy theory of the lost cosmonauts had been born. 6 decades later, the recordings are still preserved, the voices are still anonymous, and the Soviet Union has never officially acknowledged any failed crewed flights before Gagarin's official mission. The mystery is what those recordings actually capture. To understand the question, you have to understand the Soviet space program. The USSR was racing the United States to put humans in space. Yuri Gagarin's flight on April 12, 1961, in the Vostok 1 capsule, was the first publicly acknowledged crewed mission. The Soviet space program had a record of opacity. They did not announce missions in advance. They acknowledged failures only when they could not be hidden. We know now, from declassified documents and post-Soviet revelations, that the Soviet space program suffered serious accidents in its early years. The Netherlands disaster in October 1960 killed at least 78 people, including Marshal Mitrofan Netherlands, when an experimental rocket exploded on the launch pad in Kazakhstan. The disaster was kept secret for 30 years and only acknowledged after the Soviet collapse. The death of cosmonaut trainee Valentin Bondarenko in March 1961, in a fire during low-pressure altitude chamber training, was hidden until 1986. The death of cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov in April 1967, when his Soyuz 1 capsule's parachutes failed on re-entry, was acknowledged officially. The known list of secrets is real and substantial. The question is whether there were also secret crewed orbital flights that ended in disaster. The Giudicacordiglia recordings are evidence that some kind of voice traffic was being broadcast on Soviet radio frequencies. The brothers documented their listening sessions with photographs of the recording equipment, signal strength readings, and frequency logs. The recordings have been examined by linguists. The Russian language used is colloquial, the speech patterns are consistent with native speakers, and the technical content includes references to spacecraft systems. They do not appear to be hoaxes. The question is what they actually are. Theory 1 is that they are exactly what the brothers thought they were. Recordings of Soviet cosmonauts on secret flights that ended in disaster, deliberately concealed by the Soviet leadership to protect the prestige of the space program. Specific candidates suggested over the years include flights in 1960, 1961, and 1963. Theory 2, advanced by mainstream space historians, is that the recordings are genuine but misidentified. Possibilities include training simulations that were transmitted publicly for technical reasons, flight tests of automated capsules with pre-recorded human voices to test communication systems, signals from non-Soviet sources that the brothers misidentified, or signals from genuinely failed Soviet missions involving unmanned capsules misperceived as crewed. Theory 3 is that some recordings are authentic Soviet space communications and others are hoaxes or misinterpretations. The brothers had reasons of their own to embellish or claim more than they actually intercepted. They were genuinely listening to Soviet space communications. They were also two young brothers competing with their own government and the United States for prestige in the space race. So what is the historical record? After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, Russian space historians and journalists were able to access the formerly secret archives of the Soviet space program. The records have been extensively researched. The most thorough investigations, including by James Oberg, an American space historian who has spent decades documenting Soviet space program failures, have not found evidence of crewed flights ending in disaster before Gagarin or in the early Vostok period. The Soviet space program kept extensive records. The records do not show secret missions matching the Judica Cordiglia recording timestamps. This does